October 3rd, 1943. 30,000 feet above the unforgiving expanse of the North Sea. Inside the frigid, vibrating waist gun position of a B-17 Flying Fortress, a young American gunner, barely out of basic training, gripped the twin, 50-caliber Browning machine guns. His breath plumed in the sub-zero air, his eyes strained through the plexiglass dome. His world had shrunk to the harsh reality of war at altitude, a place where metal screamed and death arrived on wings. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the distant cloud bank. A Messerschmitt Bf 109, a lethal streak of German steel, was knifing through the formation, closing fast from the beam. A perfect 90-degree deflection shot, 200 yards out, the gunner's heart hammered against his ribs. He could see the black crosses on the wings, the glint of the cockpit canopy, the ominous muzzle flashes as the 109 opened fire, its cannons spitting tracers that arced dangerously close. Every fiber of his being, every instinct, honed by years of hunting, target practice, and even childhood games, screamed at him to aim directly at that fighter, to put his gun sight's reticle right on the enemy's nose, to track its deadly approach, and to squeeze the trigger, unleashing hell straight into its path. This was what felt natural, what felt right, but he hesitated. A moment of agonizing doubt, a flicker of memory from the dusty, sun-baked ranges of Las Vegas. His instructors' voices, stern and insistent, echoed in his mind. "Your instincts are wrong. Trust the math, not your gut." He was about to do something that violated every law of common sense. He aimed, not at the fighter, not ahead of it, but 6 aircraft lengths behind it, between the rapidly approaching Messerschmitt and his own bomber's tail. His fingers, trembling not from fear, but from the sheer, impossible defiance of instinct, tightened on the trigger. The twin, 50-caliber Brownings roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that momentarily drowned out the wind and the engines. A stream of tracers, a deadly river of light, poured from his guns, arcing not at the German fighter, but seemingly into empty space behind it. 2 eternal seconds later, the Messerschmitt, which had continued its inexorable, deadly approach, flew directly into that stream. It disintegrated in a ball of orange flame and black smoke, shedding pieces of metal that tumbled down into the grey North Sea. This gunner had just proven a counterintuitive truth that seemed to violate every law of physics and common sense. When firing from a moving bomber at an attacking fighter, aiming directly at the target guaranteed a miss. The secret to survival, the key to bringing down the fastest, deadliest predators in the sky, was aiming precisely where the target had already been. This counterintuitive technique, called position firing, would transform American aerial gunners from frightened men spraying bullets uselessly into the sky into precision marksmen who could bring down enemy aircraft with shocking efficiency. But the journey to this revelation had begun 3 years earlier, in a desolate Nevada desert, with men who didn't know they were about to rewrite the rules of aerial combat. January 25th, 1941, Las Vegas, Nevada. The temperature hovered near freezing as Colonel Martinez Steneth stepped out of his car, the gravel crunching under his boots, and surveyed 60 square miles of absolutely nothing. Creosote bushes, jackrabbits, and endless pale sand stretched in every direction under a vast winter sky. This desolate wasteland, he had been told, would become the most important gunnery school in American military history. The problem facing Steneth and the U.S. Army Air Forces was simple but terrifyingly urgent. America had exactly 0 specialized facilities for training aerial gunners. Not one dedicated school, not one standardized curriculum, not one proven method for turning farm boys and factory workers into men who could defend billion-dollar bombers and their crews from enemy fighters traveling at over 300 miles per hour. As of January 1941, the nation on the precipice of global war possessed no effective way to teach its airmen how to shoot from a moving platform at a moving target in 3-dimensional space. The stakes were immense. Without adequately trained gunners, the entire American strategic bombing campaign, the very cornerstone of its war plan, would fail before it even began. Heavy bombers, like the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, were designed to be flying porcupines bristling with up to 13 50-caliber machine guns. But those guns were worthless, mere dead weight, if the men behind them didn't know how to use them. The British had learned this lesson the hard way. Royal Air Force bomber crews, flying night missions over Germany, were being decimated by opportunistic Luftwaffe fighters. British gunners, trained primarily on ground targets and static exercises, were utterly unprepared for the bewildering complexity of aerial combat. They aimed directly at attacking fighters exactly as their instincts demanded. And they missed. Time and again, they missed. And they died. The United States military was determined not to repeat that catastrophe. On January 25, 1941, the Army Air Forces leased 60,000 acres of Nevada desert from the city of Las Vegas for a token sum of $1 per year. Construction crews arrived in March. Barracks, classrooms, hangars, and firing ranges began to appear as if by magic, rising from the barren earth where nothing had stood before. By June 17th, 103 instructors had reported for duty, men who would have to figure out how to teach a skill that nobody in America truly understood. The formal order for immediate aerial training for gunners came swiftly on December 9th, 1941, 2 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The base was officially activated on December 20th. Within weeks, the first students began arriving at Las Vegas Army Airfield. The war had begun, and America desperately needed trained aerial gunners. The initial training at Las Vegas began on solid ground, seeking to instill a basic understanding of deflection shooting. Instructors mounted shotguns on fixed platforms with limited arcs of fire, then had students shoot at clay pigeons hurled into the air at various angles. The idea was sound. Skeet shooting taught the fundamentals of leading a moving target, of aiming ahead to intercept something traveling perpendicular to your line of sight. Most students, with practice, hit their targets. They were learning deflection shooting, the age-old technique hunters had used for centuries. If a duck is flying left to right, you aim ahead of it. Your pellets and the duck arrive at the same point simultaneously. Simple physics, intuitive, natural. Then, everything changed. The instructors mounted the shotguns on the backs of moving trucks. As the trucks rumbled through the desert, students found their targets becoming impossible to hit. Clay pigeons that should have been easy shots sailed past untouched, leaving a trail of frustration and confusion. These men were shooting exactly as they had been taught, leading their targets, aiming ahead. Why were they missing? The answer lay in a principle so counterintuitive that even experienced instructors struggled to explain it. When you're standing still and shooting at a moving target, you aim ahead. But when you're moving and shooting at a moving target, especially one moving perpendicular to your own path, the rules flip upside down. Sergeant Robert Hayes, an instructor from Texas with a background in physics, stood before his first class of bewildered trainees and drew a simple diagram on a blackboard. He illustrated a bomber traveling at 300 miles per hour, an enemy fighter attacking from the side at the same speed, and a bullet fired from a gun on that bomber. The students, relying on instinct, assumed the bullet traveled straight from the gun to wherever they aimed. They were wrong. The bullet inherited the bomber's forward velocity the instant it left the barrel. Every round fired from a bomber was already traveling 300 miles per hour forward, in addition to whatever velocity the gun provided. This meant a bullet fired directly to the side didn't actually travel straight to the side. It traveled diagonally, pushed forward by the bomber's momentum, even as it moved away from the gun. The faster the bomber flew, the more pronounced this effect became. At 300 miles per hour, a bullet fired 90 degrees to the side would curve forward dramatically, like a curveball in baseball, but far more extreme. Hayes pulled out a piece of string and a weight, creating a simple pendulum. He walked forward while letting the weight swing. The students watched as the weight didn't hang straight down. It angled backward, pulled by the forward motion. "Release that weight," Hayes explained, "and it doesn't drop straight down. It carries forward with you. Your bullets work the same way." The implications were staggering. If a German fighter was attacking from directly abeam 90 degrees to the bomber's side and a gunner aimed directly at that fighter, the bullet would curve forward and pass harmlessly ahead of the target. The bomber's own speed guaranteed a miss. To hit a target directly to the side, you had to aim behind it. Sometimes, way behind it. The exact amount depended on the angle of attack, the speeds of both aircraft, and the distance to the target. This ballistic deception was the core problem they had to overcome. The British, through the crucible of combat over Europe, had already stumbled upon this principle through brutal trial and error. They called it the zone system, dividing the defensive sphere around a bomber into distinct zones, each requiring slightly different aiming techniques. The Americans adopted and refined this approach, eventually developing what they called position firing. Position firing was based on a critical observation about how fighters attacked bombers. To bring their fixed, forward-firing guns to bear, fighters had to fly pursuit curves, continuous arcing paths that kept their guns pointed at the bomber. From the gunner's perspective, an attacking fighter appeared to slide sideways toward the bomber's tail, while simultaneously growing larger as it closed the distance. This created a precise geometric relationship that could be calculated. The fighter's angle to the bomber's fore and aft axis, combined with the bomber's speed and the bullet's velocity, determined exactly where the gunner needed to aim. The Army Air Forces developed extensive tables, charts, and eventually a simplified rule system based on the concept of radians of deflection. A radian, in this context, was an angular measurement that told gunners how far behind the attacking fighter to aim. At a 90-degree attack angle with both aircraft at typical combat speeds, a gunner might need to apply 8 to 12 radians of deflection. Each radian represented a specific angular distance, roughly equivalent to one aircraft length at combat ranges. This meant aiming an astonishing 8 to 12 aircraft lengths behind an attacking fighter to score a hit. Everything in the gunner's previous life, every instinct from hunting and target shooting, screamed that this was insane. It felt utterly wrong, a betrayal of basic logic. But mathematics and physics didn't care about human instincts. They only cared about trajectories. By summer 1942, Las Vegas Army Airfield was graduating 600 gunners every 5 weeks. A staggering rate. The training had evolved into a comprehensive 6-week program designed to systematically break down students' natural shooting instincts and rebuild them with the counterintuitive principles of position firing. It was a mental rewiring, a re-education of the human brain to trust abstract calculations over gut feeling. The 6-week training program at Las Vegas Army Airfield was an intensive gauntlet designed to forge raw recruits into lethal aerial gunners, capable of overriding their most fundamental instincts. Week 1 covered ground school, ballistics, aircraft recognition, and the intricate mechanical knowledge of the M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun. Students learned to field strip and reassemble their weapons blindfolded, preparing them for the reality of working in cramped, freezing, vibrating gun positions. They memorized diagrams of enemy aircraft, learning their weak points and typical attack patterns. Week 2 moved to the shotgun trucks. Students spent hours shooting clay pigeons from moving platforms, ingraining the feel of shooting while in motion. Instructors gradually increased the truck speeds and the angles of the targets, forcing students to adjust their aim points further and further behind the targets. This was the first jarring step in breaking their intuitive aiming habits. Week 3 introduced the manipulation trainers. These were towering structures, 10 to 40 feet tall, arranged like a bomber formation. Students sat in mock turrets, tracking dummy fighters pulled on wires through the sky. No live ammunition yet, just the constant, repetitive practice of keeping a gun sight on a moving target while mentally compensating for the bomber's own motion. Week 4 brought the Waller gunnery trainer. Students sat in darkness, firing at fighter images projected on a large concave screen. As the images dove and weaved, students tracked and fired, while the trainer recorded every trigger pull, every hit, and every miss. The trainer could simulate any attack angle, any speed, any combat situation. Students saw their mistakes immediately, learned from them, and tried again. This virtual reality simulation was crucial for developing the muscle memory and mental discipline required for position firing. Week 5 was the first taste of real air-to-air firing. Students climbed into actual B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators, took positions at waist guns and turrets, and fired at fabric sleeves towed behind other aircraft. Each student's ammunition was color-coded. After each mission, instructors counted the holes, tallied the hits, and gave immediate, brutal feedback. Week 6 comprised advanced aerial firing and final examinations. Students faced simulated attacks from multiple angles, practiced emergency procedures for jammed guns, damaged turrets, and wounded crew members, and demonstrated proficiency in all defensive positions. The washout rate was approximately 20%, a grim testament to the difficulty of the training. Those who graduated received their coveted silver gunner wings and assignments to bomber crews, prepared to face the unholy terror of the German Jagdgeschwader. By July 7, 1943, the 7 gunnery schools across the United States had graduated 19,789 gunners. Las Vegas alone was producing 600 graduates every 5 weeks at peak capacity. The production machine was running at full throttle, but the real test, the ultimate validation of this counterintuitive training, awaited them over Europe. August 17th, 1943, 27,000 feet above Germany. 376 B-17 bombers of the United States 8th Air Force droned eastward, a silver armada stretching across the sky. Their destination, the heart of Hitler's war machine, the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, and the Messerschmitt assembly plants at Regensburg. The mission was audacious, bordering on suicidal, cripple Germany's ability to build fighters and keep existing ones flying. The Luftwaffe had other plans. Over 400 German fighters, Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds, Focke-Wulf Fokker W 190 seconds, and even the heavily armed Messerschmitt Bf 110 twin-engine destroyers, some equipped with deadly rockets, rose to meet the American formation. The air war was about to become a slaughter. The German fighters, led by veteran aces, employed new devastating tactics specifically designed to overwhelm bomber defensive fire. Head-on attacks from 12 o'clock high, where the B-17 had minimal defensive armament. Swift attacks from 6 o'clock low, exploiting the ball turret's limited firing angles, and devastating rocket attacks from beyond the effective range of the 50-caliber machine guns. What happened next shocked both sides. The American bombers lost 60 aircraft, a catastrophic 20% of the attacking force. It was a brutal, bloody defeat that convinced many Allied leaders that daylight strategic bombing without fighter escort was impossible. The skies were simply too dangerous. But the Germans also lost aircraft, not the handful they expected, not 10 or 20. The American gunners, applying the position firing techniques learned at Las Vegas and the other gunnery schools, shot down approximately 27 German fighters. This number, while far lower than the initial combat claims of over 200 kills made in the fog and chaos of battle, where multiple gunners often fired at the same target, represented something profoundly new. American bomber gunners, properly trained, could hit and destroy attacking fighters. Waist gunners across the formation, their hearts pounding, forced themselves to apply the techniques they'd learned in the Nevada desert. Fighter attacking from 3 o'clock level, range approximately 300 yards, apply 12 radians deflection, aim between the fighter and the bomber's tail. They opened fire in 3-round bursts, observed strikes along the fighter's wing root and engine. The fighter would break off, smoking, and disappear in a vertical dive. The technique worked precisely as the mathematics predicted, but the gunners also noted something critical. Their initial instinct was always to aim directly at the target. They had to consciously, deliberately force themselves to apply proper deflection. Training overcame instinct. Without the systematic instruction at the gunnery schools, they would have missed. This was the key insight. Position firing wasn't natural. It violated every hunting instinct, every basic shooting principle. Only intensive, repetitive training could override those instincts in the stress of combat. Men who had spent 6 weeks shooting from moving platforms, tracking fighters on simulators, and firing at towed targets could force themselves to aim behind when every nerve in their bodies screamed to aim ahead. The Schweinfurt raid taught both sides valuable lessons. The Germans learned that massed bomber formations with properly trained gunners were far more dangerous than expected. Individual fighter attacks, even from advantageous angles, carried significant risk. The Americans learned that daylight bombing without fighter escort was unsustainable, despite good gunnery training. But the raid also validated the training program. Position firing worked. The Schweinfurt raid, for all its cost, illuminated a path forward. Position firing worked, but it was incredibly taxing. Gunner fatigue, the sheer complexity of calculating deflection angles in real time amidst the chaos of combat, and the brutal cold and vibration of the bomber environment made consistent application of the technique a monumental challenge. The question now was how to make gunners even more effective, reducing the mental burden of these counterintuitive calculations. The answer came from an unexpected source: Britain. In late 1943, Royal Air Force night fighters began equipping with a revolutionary new device called the Mark II gyro gun sight. This technological marvel used a spinning gyroscope, mirrors, and a complex series of electrical and mechanical calculations to automatically compute the correct deflection for any attack angle, target speed, and range. The pilot simply placed a moving reticle on the target, and the sight did the rest, showing him exactly where to aim. The United States Army Air Forces immediately recognized the immense potential. If a gyroscopic sight could calculate deflection for fighter pilots, could a similar system work for bomber gunners? In November 1943, American engineers began adapting British gyro sight technology for bomber turret applications. The result was the K-14 gun sight for fighters and adapted versions for bomber turrets. These sights featured a revolutionary dual reticle system. One reticle, fixed, showed where the guns actually pointed. A second reticle, gyroscopically controlled, showed where the bullets would actually go, accounting for the aircraft's motion, the angle of fire, and basic ballistics. In level flight, with no deflection required, the two reticles aligned perfectly. But the moment a gunner swung his turret to track a target, the gyro reticle moved, showing him exactly where to aim. The gunner simply had to keep the moving reticle on the target. The sight automatically calculated the proper lead. Installing these gyro sights in bomber turrets presented significant challenges. The sights were bulky, complex, and required the gunner to input the target's wingspan to estimate range, a near impossible task under combat conditions, with fighters attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. Still, the gyro sights represented a massive improvement. Tests conducted in early 1944 showed that gunners using gyro sights achieved approximately double the hit rate compared to standard ring and bead sights, even when both groups understood position firing principles. The automated deflection calculation removed the mental burden of remembering radian charts and angular measurements. By summer 1944, significant numbers of American bombers carried compensating sights, automated systems that calculated deflection based on the turret's position and the bomber's airspeed and altitude. These weren't as sophisticated as full gyro sights, but they were simpler to operate under combat stress. Gunners set their airspeed and altitude once, then simply tracked the target. The sight adjusted the aiming point automatically. The effectiveness difference was dramatic. Bombers equipped with advanced sighting systems and gunners trained in position firing could bring down attacking fighters at ranges and angles previously considered impossible. By late 1944, the Army Air Forces had refined their gunnery training program based on 2 years of brutal combat experience. The 6-week course expanded to include more advanced topics: gunnery control and discipline, ensuring gunners didn't accidentally fire at friendly fighters; combat tactics, understanding German and Japanese fighter attack patterns; and emergency procedures for jammed guns, damaged turrets, and wounded crew members. One innovation, however, particularly captured the imagination of both instructors and students, solidifying the lessons of position firing in the most visceral way possible. Operation Pinball. Las Vegas Army Airfield received 7 specially modified Bell RP-63 King Cobra fighters. These aircraft, affectionately known as pinballs, wore thick duralumin armor, plating over their entire exterior. Students fired special frangible bullets, ammunition made from compressed, powdered lead and plastic that shattered into dust on impact with any hard surface. The pinball aircraft carried electronic sensors and a large red light in the propeller spinner. When a frangible bullet struck the aircraft, the red light flashed. Students could immediately see their hits. More importantly, the pinball pilots flew realistic attack patterns, diving and weaving exactly as German and Japanese fighters did. Students learned to track real aircraft, pulling real maneuvers, not fabric sleeves, on predictable tow courses. The pinball program produced dramatic improvements in gunnery scores. Students who trained against pinballs showed 30 to 40% better hit rates in subsequent combat compared to students trained only on towed targets. The program expanded to all 7 Army Air Force's gunnery schools by early 1945, but the most revealing data came from analyzing combat results. As more bombers received advanced sights and more gunners completed improved training, the effectiveness of defensive fire increased measurably. Intelligence officers tracking German fighter losses attributed to bomber gunners documented a clear upward trend from mid-1943 through war's end. The statistics were complicated by the introduction of long-range fighter escorts, which dramatically reduced bomber losses and changed the nature of aerial combat over Europe. By early 1944, American P-51 Mustangs could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back, forcing German fighters to engage aggressive American and British fighters throughout their own territory. Still, the data was clear. Bombers with trained gunners and proper sighting equipment shot down approximately twice as many attacking fighters as bombers with untrained crews and basic sights. This 2x improvement came from a combination of factors: better training in position firing principles, more sophisticated sighting equipment, and improved tactics and fire discipline. But at the core was the counterintuitive truth learned in the Nevada desert. The Pacific Theater provided another brutal testing ground for American gunnery techniques. Japanese fighter tactics differed significantly from German approaches. Zero fighters and Oscars relied on superior maneuverability rather than armor and firepower. They attacked from steeper angles, executed tighter turns, and often pressed attacks to point-blank range, relying on their agility to avoid defensive fire. American gunners adapted position firing principles to these new challenges, demonstrating the universality of the ballistic truth. The ultimate evolution of position firing technology arrived with the B-29 Superfortress, deployed in the Pacific from late 1944 onward. This revolutionary bomber featured a remote control gun system. Gunners sat in pressurized compartments, often far from the actual guns, controlling turrets via periscope sights and electronic fire control systems. The system automatically calculated deflection based on target range, angle, and aircraft speeds. Central Fire Control gunners on B-29 seconds described the system's effectiveness in post-war interviews. Japanese fighters would come in fast, usually from below, trying to get under the formation. Gunners would acquire the target in their sights. The computer would calculate range and deflection, and they would fire. The turrets would swing automatically, barrels would elevate or depress, all without the gunner ever directly touching the weapon. All the gunner had to do was keep the sight on target and squeeze the trigger. The speeds were too high, the angles too difficult for manual calculation. The automated system made defensive gunnery possible against Japan's fastest fighters. The B-29's Central Fire Control System represented the pinnacle of position firing technology. Human gunners provided target acquisition and tracking. Computers handled all ballistics calculations, including deflection, bullet drop, and even wind drift. The combination proved devastatingly effective. When the war ended in August 1945, The Army Air Forces had graduated over 214,000 aerial gunners from 7 specialized gunnery schools. Las Vegas alone had trained over 44,000 gunners through August 1944. These men had learned to override their instincts, to trust mathematics and physics over common sense, to let their bombers' speed carry bullets into enemy aircraft. The statistical impact of position firing was difficult to quantify precisely. Combat claims were notoriously inflated. Multiple gunners often fired at the same fighter, each claiming the kill. Gun camera footage was limited, especially in bombers, where cameras couldn't cover all defensive positions. German and Japanese loss records were incomplete, destroyed in bombing raids or lost in the chaos of surrender. But analysis of available data consistently suggested that properly trained American bomber gunners achieved legitimate kill rates approximately double those of untrained gunners using the same equipment. This 2x improvement came almost entirely from understanding and applying position firing principles. The technique didn't make gunners superhuman, but it made them competent, and in aerial combat, competence meant survival. The lessons learned in World War II gunnery schools influenced military aviation for decades afterward. Korean War B-29 gunners used refined versions of the same position firing techniques in aerial combat against advanced Soviet MiG-15 fighters. The principles remained valid even against jet aircraft, with significant performance advantages over the propeller-driven bombers. Modern fighter aircraft still employ the same basic principle. Advanced computing gun sights calculate deflection automatically, but the underlying physics remains identical. A projectile fired from a moving aircraft inherits that aircraft's velocity. To hit a target, you must account for your own motion, not just the target's motion. The Nevada desert that once hosted the Las Vegas Army Airfield is now Nellis Air Force Base, home of the Air Force Fighter Weapons School and the Thunderbirds demonstration team. The old gunnery ranges are gone, replaced by modern training facilities, but the fundamental truth discovered there in that desolate stretch of land in 1941 remains engraved in American military doctrine. When you're standing still, aim ahead of a moving target. When you're moving, aim behind. Physics doesn't care what feels natural, it only cares what works. The German Luftwaffe never fully adopted position firing principles for their bomber gunners, relying more on individual marksmanship and informal experience. The Japanese military faced similar challenges, with training remaining limited and informal. Only the United States combined systematic position firing training with advanced sighting technology and industrial-scale production of trained personnel. This combination created bomber crews who could defend themselves effectively even without fighter escort. Though escort remained vastly preferable, the transformation from instinctive aiming to calculated position firing represented a profound shift in human skill development. For thousands of years, hunters and soldiers had learned to aim directly at their targets or slightly ahead for moving targets. These techniques were intuitive, easily taught, and effective in most situations. Aerial combat in fast-moving bombers broke all the old rules. Speeds were too high, angles too complex, and the physics too counterintuitive. Success required abandoning instinct and embracing abstract mathematics. Trainees had to trust that aiming 12 aircraft lengths behind an attacking fighter would result in a hit, even when everything they'd ever known about shooting said otherwise. This mental transformation was perhaps the greatest achievement of the Army Air Force's gunnery schools. Not the facilities built in the Nevada desert, not the sophisticated training equipment, but the ability to rewire human instincts to override millions of years of hunter-gatherer programming with calculated precision. The legacy of World War II aerial gunnery training extends far beyond the war itself. The systematic approach to breaking down complex skills, the emphasis on repetitive training to override instinct, and the integration of technology with human performance became models for military training worldwide. American bomber gunners learned to account for their own motion. They learned to aim behind, and in learning that one counterintuitive principle, they helped win the most destructive war in human history. It is a story about physics and mathematics, but it is also a story about trust. Trust in instructors who taught techniques that felt wrong. Trust in equipment that calculated what human brains struggled to compute. And trust in training that overrode millions of years of evolution. That trust was earned in the skies over Europe and the Pacific, where properly trained gunners brought down enemy fighters that would have otherwise killed their crews, and where understanding deflection meant survival